Welcome to the first round of the Brewmaster Challenge, fellow wizards. In their fight against the Spike Scourge, our 8 competitors may need some help. From the future, the brewers were allowed to choose any pre-modern card that is not banned or on the watch list. They were then given 4 days to build an otherwise Atlantic legal 93-94 deck that also includes 4 copies of their chosen card. Remember, the finalists will need to win once with each of their spicy brews to be crowned the champion. Let's take a look at the round 1 bracket. This episode will feature Jonnie and Danny. Best of luck, brewers. Don't forget to vote for which brew you like best at the end of this video. Hello, Wizard. Tell us a bit about yourself and your Magic history before we jump into your round 1 submission.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jonnie. I am a wizard since 1994. That's when I started playing Magic, and that was during my early teens, and I played up until Tempest, I think, and then called it quits because I started another school, got new friends and stuff, and also I think it was like 6 or 7 years I was kind of, or 4 or 5 years, whatever, I was kind of done with Magic for the moment. Kept on still occasionally playing kitchen table Magic, and then had a few like rebounds where I got back during the Invasion block and Odyssey. That was just for like a year or a half, and then totally quit again. Sold my cards a bunch of times, of course, like everybody else. And but yeah, and then eventually I found this old school community, because last couple of years before I found that, in like 2015, I had picked up the kitchen table Magic with a bunch of friends since the old days, and we more or less played old school. I mean, we played a variant of old school that was pretty similar to old school 95, I guess. It was like old school up to Mirage or Alliances.
I see.
Not per, like, because we set rules, but that was like the cards we knew, and that was kind of the allure with old school as well. I don't have to learn new cards, even though Legends is obviously a totally new set every time I look at the spoiler.
Right. Exactly. All right, so why don't you talk to us about what you brewed, and specifically talk about why you picked the card from the future that you picked.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like your previous participants in this, this was a totally new card pool for me. Definitely most of the cards. So I made it quite easy for myself, and like just searched for all rare enchantments, sorceries, and artifacts, because I think they would probably give me some good deck ideas, which creatures probably wouldn't.
Okay.
Now, however, I ended up with a creature that is also an artifact creature, of course, which is Metalworker. Yeah, I was quite surprised that Metalworker was actually not banned in pre-modern, which probably makes sense if you're a pre-modern player. But in old school, it would be pretty fucking broken, which this deck apparently shows. I call this deck a well-oiled piece of machinery.
Sure.
Which it is. And for me, also brewing in the Atlantic rule set space is something new as well. So, I mean, everybody's keep telling me that, Fallen Empires makes tribal decks so viable and stuff like that. And I think this pre-modern card, Metalworker, makes another tribal deck real viable, and that is the book tribal deck.
Nice.
So what I've been brewing is a book tribal. I have the Yamdai Tome, one of them, Yalom Tome, and of course the MVP in the deck is Book of Ras. Sure. Yeah, the interaction with the Metalworker Book of Ras is clearly insane. I mean, you get Necropotence on steroids. Of course, you pay double amount of lives, but that's really not an issue if you pack 3 Stream of Lights.
Sure. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, looking at
the deck is a bunch of cards, and eventually either trade life with the Mirror Universe or just gain more life with Stream of Life before you finish them off with the Hurricane.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, I'm looking at the deck list, and I also I like the Howling Mines, and just there's many interesting choices in here, which maybe we can kind of talk about at this point. I really love the one Colossus of Sardia as well.
Yeah, it was like a last minute Hail Mary. That used to be a time vault. I had one iteration of this deck which was heavy on blue and black because of tutor and power cards and stuff. But then I realized that I don't really need black because Aladdin's Lamp is a tutor every turn.
Sure.
Especially with Metalworker. I mean, I look at half my deck and choose which card I want.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, the one thing, Aladdin's Lamp also protects me from opposing Leviathans when I get Titania's Song out, which the Colossus does not.
I see.
That's my only protection from Leviathans.
That's a concern you have.
Oh yeah.
Of course. Yeah, and then I like the one Eureka as well. It seems to kind of that's a nice thing to be able to just have in your starting hand every once in a while, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not really needed, and I went from 3 to 1,
Sure.
and there's an argument for actually making that into the fourth stream of life. The stream of life is really essential when you start drawing cards with the Metalworkers.
Sure. So I realize you probably haven't played very much with this deck, but is there any kind of what's your most your favorite part about this deck? Like maybe some kind of interaction, just something interesting about your deck in particular that you are most excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I goldfished it a bunch of times, and I think it's really binary. Either it just goes off almost instantly. I mean, if I land my Instill Energy on a Metalworker with a Book of Brass, I draw insane amount of card, gain insane amount of lives, just play another Metalworker and fast one and so on. It's surprisingly efficient when it starts rolling, more so than you would think by just looking at it. But the key is of course to get the Metalworker out.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the tricky part, I suppose. Yeah. Well, I also like that it's a fast spawn deck as well, right? Because you're intending to draw a lot of cards, and then also be able to just keep on ramping, and that lets you draw more cards, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually really essential that you don't play your Moxen because you want to keep all artifacts in hand. So fast spawn is actually essential to play lands instead of Moxen.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like this deck quite a bit. It looks really very much. So I've thought about just after I saw all the different deck lists kind of come in. I realized there were two varieties of deck, right? And some of them are let's kind of take some deck that I know about in old school that I like to play and put a card in it that I think would make it better or more fun or whatever. And then there's other ones where it's like, oh, I found this cool card. Let me build a deck around the fact that I get that card now, right? And it's kind of, there's sort of two different paths to take. And this definitely feels like the latter, right? Like you definitely have Metalworker, and this is a Metalworker deck, right? And
I mean, people could argue that a Metalworker deck with fireballs would be more efficient than Hurricane, but I disagree.
Yeah. I mean, I'd much rather see a Book of Wrath attacking me than a fireball to the face, right? That seems a lot more fun. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have to admit, I actually had those exactly what you're talking about. Those two different varieties.
Sure.
I had one like idea with Urza's Rage in a mana flare deck.
Oh, okay.
Which seemed pretty good. But then I eventually went up with it because I don't play green almost at all in old school. So this was a really good opportunity for me to go mono green, and actually mono green super aggressive and over the top.
Sure. So again, I realize you haven't played anything yet, and there are no sideboards because of how the match is structured at the end, right?
Yeah.
But is there anything in particular you're sort of worried about playing against, like kind of just broad archetypes? You know, what are you worried about playing against?
I think I have issues with the people playing like first turn lions or second turn dibs, because I really need my life total to be pretty high the first time I draw cards. I mean, after I draw the first 7 or 10 cards or whatever, then I can always stream of life to get me up again. But I need to have at least like 16, 14 lives when I start drawing cards with the Book of Brass.
Gotcha.
So really quick creature decks is the biggest worry, definitely.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Do you have any closing thoughts for us? Anything else you want people to know?
No, other than I really like this challenge, and and I really enjoy you putting this on, because it's
my pleasure.
Fun.
Yeah, but yeah, I've enjoyed looking at all the deck lists, and I really wanted to build one of my own, and I just haven't had the opportunity to do that. Of course, the other rounds will be slightly different than this one. So I hope everyone enjoys the upcoming rounds just as much as they've enjoyed this one. So
absolutely, really looking forward to see all the other participants' decks.
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, and good luck in the voting process.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, Wizard. Tell us a bit about yourself and your Magic history before we jump into your round 1 submission.
Greetings, Guardian. So my name is Danny Friedman. I am a part of the Magic Club, the Lords of the Pit, out of Chicago. I don't live in Chicago anymore, but I am a part of that club, or was. When I started that club with Shane and Dom, who is now a part of Beasts of the Bay. So I imagine you are quite familiar with him. So anyways, I got started playing Magic when I was really young, like 1994, with Revised. And eventually I stopped playing like most people do, and got back in the mid-2000s playing Vintage. And I discovered Old School. I discovered Magnus's blog, I think it was 2013. And after discovering Magnus's blog, I was talking with Steve Menendian, who was local. I was living in Oakland, California at the time, and he was really jazzed on playing Old School. And we never got a chance to actually play. And I didn't go to any of the events that they ended up having, which they did have a few in like 2014. I think one at the beginning, maybe one at the beginning of 2014, one in like May of 2014. And then I moved to Chicago, and I started playing Old School with Jason Jaco, and everything kind of took off from there. And now lots of people play Old School, so it's really cool. Lots of people to play with. Yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up here, and I appreciate you making me part of this.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. Well, why don't you tell us a bit about your brew, and specifically why you chose the card from the future that you chose?
Yes. Okay, so I'm actually looking at my deck in front of me. So I really like Enchantress decks, like many people. And I saw the other opponent, Elliot, also chose Enchantress. And I agree with a lot of his reasons. So I hope people have watched that video by the time they get to this one, because yes, the coolest thing about Enchantress is it does this really interesting effect for Durin Enchantress when we talk about Old School. And the problem with it for Durin Enchantress is it has a ridiculous cost, and it is susceptible to probably every form of standard creature removal. It's susceptible to Bolt and Swords and the Abyss, and it costs a lot of mana. It's yeah. So it's sad because most really cool Enchantress decks start with Enchantress, and then you just end up cutting them all. And so the cool thing about playing Enchantress in this future format, we have access to Argothian Enchantress. And Argothian Enchantress is the way Enchantress should have been designed. It has Shroud, and it costs a colorless and a green. And it does the exact same thing Enchantress does. This one's a 0/1 rather than the 0/2 Verdurin, but the toughness doesn't really matter unless you were going to use it to block, which mostly irrelevant there. I guess 1/1s can't kill you, but in the Verdurin, but it's susceptible to everything, so it doesn't really matter. So anyways, yeah, Argothian Enchantress, really, really cool. A great opportunity to try an Enchantress set that may actually work. I did run through a bunch of other ideas before settling on Argothian Enchantress because I think it was probably the spiciest. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do in this future format. The first thought I had was a Fact or Fiction recall version of the deck playing no Jame Day Tomes.
Okay.
And you basically just, four recalls will recur the 5 cards you see and don't get to put in your hand, or do get to put, over and over again. And it seemed really broken and not spicy at all. I then thought about Time Vault with Voltaic Key. Again, kind of not very interesting. Seems very good, but I think we're here to do something cool. So then I moved to like Goblin Welder, Bazaar of Baghdad, which seemed really fun. And then like Copy Artifacts and Triskelions. But again, like actually seems good. So of course I landed on Enchantress because Enchantress is so not good in old school that maybe this will push it over to being quasi-playable. So my first thought was, of course, the most unplayable Enchantress deck, which would be 4 Argothian, 4 Verduran, Rabid Wombats, and things like Holy Strength. So you can possibly pump your Verdurans even if you have to, because obviously you get, 5 for 1 on a Swords to Plowshares on your Rabid Wombat if that happens. So it gets to play all funny cards like Flight, Invisibility. And then after I ended up with like a 74 card deck, I decided maybe that wasn't the way to go. So went back to my roots and decided to make a Enchantress control deck. And Control Prison. The first, I've actually dabbled in this before with Verduran, and I've played Enchantress Living Tim before. And the idea there is basically you play Living Plane and you play Prodigal Sorcerer and you blow up your opponent's lands, and you get to play fun cards like Instill Energy, which work with your Enchantress. They work with your Birds of Paradise.
Sure.
And
your Tim.
Yeah, exactly. So they go on those two and draws you cards off the Enchantress. Really cool. And the nice thing is you've got so many different like removal targets that hopefully your Enchantress survives a little bit. And then I thought about it in this context with Argothian, and it seemed fine, but I was really interested in the Abyss Argothian interaction, which is because the Abyss actually targets. Because early cards were not designed correctly. In this day and age, would definitely be sacrificed, but it targets. And so because it targets, it actually can't hit Argothian, which is really cool. And I was excited about that interaction. And the Abyss happens to be an enchant world. And because it's an enchant world, you cannot play Living Plane in this deck.
That makes sense, yeah.
So that's kind of what made it so that I didn't do that. I also had a really bad experience with like Matt Moss playing a Triskelion, and he 6 for 1'd me when I had I think 1 bird and 2 Tims in play, all with Instill Energies on them, and he plays like Triskelion and like 6 for 1's me. So like that, I probably, that's PTSD.
Creature enchantments have issues, very classic Magic problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. So so I've got my my Triskelion PTSD with Enchantress. So I opted to play a list that is not susceptible to any of that type of stuff. So
sounds good.
So looking at this list, the only creatures I play are Argothian Enchantress. I play 2 copies of the Abyss, which will not affect that, and then a Chaos Orb. So between the 2 Abysses and the Chaos Orb, that's the only way I can interact with my opponent's creatures. That's it. I guess I have a balance too, which will probably take out my Enchantresses. That seems like a last resort kind of card, and hopefully I don't end up losing a bunch of Enchantresses to that, but we'll see if I ever have to play this thing. So it has, I think, 17 enchantments looking at this. And I'm just going to put my list on the screen so I'm looking at you more. So I think it's got 17 enchantments. If I counted correctly, it plays 2 main deck energy fluxes, mostly because I'm not playing very many artifacts, and I don't require artifacts to survive here. And any of my artifacts are sacrificable. Maybe the only one that needs to stick around is Chaos Orb, and hopefully I can pay 2. That seems about as bad as it can be. So the main deck energy fluxes seem good. If I face something, like a Goblin Welder deck that's got tons and tons of artifacts, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. It's probably too expensive. So with that in the Abyss, it's a little difficult not playing Sol Ring because this deck requires a lot of forests, and so the mana base is kind of ugly, and the forests are here because I'm playing 2 Dark Heart of the Woods. So Dark Heart of your Woods is kind of this interesting solution that goes in combos with Fastbond and Sylvan Library to help you draw cards and not totally kill yourself. Additionally, to save yourself in the situation of creature damage. But that requires you to play so many forests. So I'm playing, let's see, I think like 10 forests in this deck. no strip mines. The factories are in there mostly as blockers and an alternate win condition because just like Elliot's deck, this plays 2 Underworld Dreams as the win con, and I think he's on 3. And I think it's a little dicey. That's what I found. I tested this a little bit. I actually played some games with Florian. And got very lucky, fortunately. I think Gush is probably a better card than Argothian Enchantress, but
maybe a little.
Yeah, it was a good feeling. Good feeling to win some games there. But yeah, like it was an interesting interaction, and I think the factories were more useful than I would have expected. Sadly, cannot sacrifice those to Darkheart. Another interesting idea I was bouncing off of before I land on this was Lich is really funny. And in this future format, you get some interesting card choices, like you can play Glacial Chasm with Lich, and that with Fast Bond out allows you to sacrifice all forests to Dark Heart of the Woods and not take extra damage when you play increasing ones. But you really want multiple Ice Age cards because you also want Zuran Orb for your non-forests. So, and then the other thing is for Glacial Chasm, especially without Zuran Orb, seems absolutely terrible because that land is, you only want to play at the turn you're going off. And so, yeah, so all these bounces, all these weird bounces between different possibilities. But I really think like Enchantress is totally this like interesting thing that it's a shame this is not part of standard old school, because I think it would really vary the metagame. So it's cool that we get this opportunity. And I think Elliot thought the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I really appreciate the old school style Argothian Enchantresses that you have in your deck picture here.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Those are pretty awesome. And then also, oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, they're pretty awesome.
Alpha format. Let's see.
Alpha wording and stuff. Yeah.
Argothian Enchantress cannot be the target of spells or effects.
That sounds exactly right. Yeah. And then also, I like the one remove enchantments actually.
Oh
that's pretty cool.
So that's like totally a win more card. You know, you could think of it as like, okay, I can bounce all my enchantments to save enchantments in the case that somebody targets something I really care about. But if you look across the spectrum of enchantments, the really the only important enchantment is Underworld Dreams. That's the only enchantment that's hard to get into play and that you absolutely need to win. All the other ones are just kind of like, it's nice if you get them out. I guess Sylvan Library is really good if you're drawing absolutely dead, but if the game's going normally, your Sylvan's probably just okay at that point. But yeah, remove enchantments. It can save your enchantments if somebody tries to go after one, but again, it'll bounce them all. It also, if you've got one, or if you're really lucky, 2 enchantresses in play, you can draw an absolute ton of cards by playing remove enchantments. So, you know, it's kind of cool to think, okay, I can tap a land for 2 mana because it's got a Wild Growth on it, remove enchantments, have floating mana, play that on other lands, you know, just all sorts of things can happen. You can sack those tap lands.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a really good, I'm forgetting the name of the card, but, you know, the 1 green counter. It's like an amazing version of that in some cases, but then in other cases, it's just super amazing, right? Like you just draw a million cards, right?
Yeah, it's like this hybrid, like it's hybrid of Void Fate and Hurkyl's Recall, because like you look at a bunch of these combo decks of like net mana by Hurkyl's Recalling and, you know, floating a bunch of mana off Moxen and, you know, mana vaults, Hurkyl's Recall, play them all again, you know. And remove enchantments is very similar in how it works. It's basically like, get all these enchantments, do crazy things, draw a bunch of cards off playing them, remove enchantments, do it all again, you know.
That's pretty awesome.
It's fun.
So I realize you don't know exactly what the future holds. So the next 2 rounds will be different challenges than this one, right? So
yes.
And I think you're the first person to actually tell me that they've played with their deck that we're talking about right now.
Yes,
Florian didn't really. I guess Florian mentioned it too, but most people haven't played. Haven't played their deck at all. So, you know, what are you worried about as far as when you actually get to a point where you have to play these decks? You know, what are you worried about having to play against with this deck in particular?
Well, I'm definitely worried about the Argothian Enchantress mirrors if it happens, as neither of us have removal for Argothian Enchantress. I guess Elliot doesn't even play Balance, but I guess we each have an Enchantress that doesn't do anything. Abyss doesn't affect them, so that would be really bad. And he plays more Underworld Dreams than me, so that seems really good. Disenchant's really good there, so yep, but pretty scared of that. It would definitely be a very funny game. A lot of
Yeah.
really weird interactions. I think any deck just filled with disenchants is like a really big problem. Really good control because Argothian Enchantress can be countered. So, when your opponent goes, Mox Sapphire Island and you go, land Mox Argothian Enchantress, like that's going to get countered. And
Right.
a bad feeling because all of these cards are super mediocre without the Enchantress, aside from the restricted list. So, pretty much, if your Enchantress gets countered, the only hope you have is if, you have Ancestral Recall or Brain Geyser or Sylvan Library in your hand and just can reload and play a bunch more threats really quickly because this deck cannot do very much without an Enchantress in play.
Sure.
So I think, control is scary. Enchantress. I think one cool thing is prison decks are not scary. The reason I chose Underworld Dreams, I've been saying this for a long time in other contexts, is that enchantments are the hardest type of permanents to remove. It's just Disenchant, Chaos Orb, Tranquility, Nivinural's Disc. I guess remove enchantments, but that's for you. I mean, enchantments are just impossible to deal with. And you look at that list, it's like Tranquility is a sideboard card. We're not playing sideboards here. Nivinural's Disc is also often a sideboard card, not generally main deck card unless you're talking Troll Disco. And so maybe somebody's made some really cool Goblin Welder Nivinural's Disc recursion deck. That would be amazing. But but yeah, I just think it's really hard to remove enchantments in general. So a deck loaded with enchantments, especially without sideboards, I just think you're not susceptible to so many things that normal decks are. It's like, I don't care about the 1-for-1 creature removal. I don't care about artifact removal. I pretty much only care about the list of cards I gave you. And that's a pretty short list. So it's decks beating me and then decks that can, contain that short list of cards. I guess Counterspell too. So yeah, it seems like a fun deck to play. I'm excited to play. I hope I get a chance to play games with this because it's the games Florian and I played were pretty entertaining. Remove enchantments was really cool in one of them. So I hope I get another chance to play it.
Yeah, I heard Florian lamenting about his experience. That's pretty normal though.
Yeah, he wanted to quit Magic, I think.
Is that right? Yeah. That sounds about right. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll close this out. Do you have any additional thoughts? Anything else you want people to know about before they decide whether to vote for your deck or not?
If somehow Elliot and I make the finals of this, we might be in store for a really terrible matchup, which might be really funny. It might be more in the spirit of this than we had pictured in first. So. Cool.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing, actually. I think.
Yes, I think so too. A lot of cards.
I would love to see that. Yeah. It seems actually pretty exciting, and it would be interesting to watch the challenge of you figuring out how to actually kill your opponent. I think.
Yes.
It'll just be a tricky scenario.
Actually, when Florian and I were playing, he got a Mirror Universe out, which was really problematic because I had both a Darkheart and a Sylvan. So I just kept our life at parity, and he never was able to really do something useful with the mirror.
Makes sense.
And I could always gain more life than him. So it's like, I can imagine that interaction. Like if I ended up facing up against Elliot playing mirror and all these similar cards, I think you would see a very silly game of Magic.
Yeah. Well, that seems pretty exciting. And
can only hope, right?
I'd be looking forward to that. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us, and good luck in the voting process.
Thank you.